Life in the mid-19th century was tough for everyone on the windswept prairies of Manitoba. But it was women who made the huge impact that allowed the prairies to be settled. Here's a segment from Prairie Public's documentary series, Built on Agriculture.
It's been said that if men were the pioneers, women were the settlers. They were the ones that created a home out of some very, very sparse resources that they had to work with when people first arrived here. And they were doing this all the time while they were caring for and producing children, which were a major source of labor on the farm.
And the day I was born, the thrashing crew pulled in that morning to start thrashing. And Mother not only had to look after me, she had to feed the thrashing gang, about a dozen men. And one of the neighbors came over to help her look after feeding the thrashing crew, and a week later she had a baby of her own.
We had to make a living in the 30s, and Mother had to help with the milking at night, and I did. We all learned because the men were busy with using horses to farm, and so it was a whole different era.
We've seen the farm women's jobs change over time, as all jobs on the farm have changed. But they're still the home builders, and they're still feeding the family. In many cases, today it's the farm wife that leaves the farm to work, and it's her salary that helps to support the family.
I think it's electricity was the bonus that came to all rural communities in 1947, because we had no electricity on the farm. So it was a role to be homemaker, and you had to make the bread, and if you did the milking, then you had to put it through the cream separator, which was a horrible thing to wash. But Mother would print up 15 pounds of butter at a time and send them to Deloraine, and that was the money for groceries.
As these farms became established, the attention very quickly turned towards community structures that provided some civilization and social support to what they were doing on the land. The women's movement becoming very powerful through organizations like the Women's Institute organization, and many of the women who were key players in that were people who came from pioneer stock.
I met one lady when I was working with WI, telling me that when she was farming there, she would go to a WI meeting 6 miles away, and she would walk with a baby in her arms, another one over her shoulder, and the little ones walking for 6 miles to cross a stream and go to that meeting and then come home and do the chores.
The Women's Institute organization, which fought, of all things, for public restrooms, because in that time, women would come to town with the family. The men could go to the pubs, but women weren't allowed there. There was no place for women and children to be, and that was the foundation of the restrooms.
For a lot of women, Women's Institute was their only contact as a group together. An older lady said that one of their members came in and she was pregnant and she had 9 children already at home. The group gathered around her and just cried because family planning wasn't legal at that time. Cases like that, you feel that you've been right inside a person's heart.
Though farmers, for the most part, were exempt from military service, and that doesn't mean they didn't go, but I think that's where one found the women taking a much bigger role in the management of agriculture. And I think when the fellows came back after the war, the ladies had taken over a certain amount of doing some of these things. And I think we find a lot of farms now that the role played by women, particularly women who graduate with degrees in agriculture, more than half of the students taking agriculture at the University of Manitoba are women.
The first woman, Dorothea Clark, graduated in 1922. It wasn't until 13 years later that the second woman graduated. And looking at the statistics, up until the mid-60s, from the time the college started until the mid-60s, there have been only 21 women students graduate. In the mid-90s, 2 of the years there's actually 75% of the student body were women. Now it's about 50-50.
Cora Hind was a woman who came to Western Canada in the early 1800s. She had come out here to work as a school teacher and wanted to become a newspaper reporter. She was originally turned down. It was considered newspapers were no place for women to be. But she ultimately became the agricultural editor of the Winnipeg Free Press. And she took that job and created a persona around herself because of her very intuitive ability to judge how much the crops were going to produce. Every year she traveled across Western Canada and looked at the crops and wrote what she thought that crop was going to produce, and she was remarkably accurate in her projections. And she was widely followed by anyone in the world that had an interest in what Western Canada was going to contribute to the world grain trade. She was also very active in the suffragette movement and very active in securing social supports for women. After fighting so hard to get a job working in the press, she was ultimately paid the best compliment she could have received at the time. Her colleagues reported that the best newspaper man in Western Canada was a woman, and that was E. Cora Hind.
Prairie Mosaic is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, the North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.